Welcome. Welcome to the realm of ideas is free to all and it's real. This is episode 85, the new era, things to come. We had a preview on Wednesday, as we usually do, where we spoke briefly about the topic, and then we'll kind of go more into detail tonight. But we spoke pretty much about the certain things that we see as leading us towards a certain direction, which we think has kind of consequence. Next week, we'll talk about the value, the consequence of value, and try to understand that as relates to principles, maybe as relates to this. Um, I feel that the coming age is what I would call the organic age. Is an age that kind of gives rise to the idea of an interconnectedness, a process-based network of ideas. I think it's more the sense of an integration of processes rather than just a kind of conglomeration or collection of parts. I think we're moving from an obsession with the machine to an obsession with the organism. Organic life has been seen and understood as a kind of metaphor in very, very many different vocations and scenes. I was speaking, answering a post that we received from Mr. Spock, and he asked about, the idea of the machine. And I felt that, one of the things that's interesting is that, we still identify that person who is the individual who works on those things, that takes the science and applies it to technology. And that individual is called an engineer, which is an obsession with the engine. And the engine has always been seen as that great age of the mechanical age, of the industrial age, the machine age. And I think that's kind of an indication of the fact that we still see these things in that regard. So, with that said, we even talked about the idea that the term art science complex was itself a concession to a lack of understanding that would possibly be able to be superseded once we get into the organic age. This idea that art and science were understood as separate things and not a complex or a network of things, all basically dedicated to the same basic nature of understanding. I received also from Mr. Spock a really interesting video that talked about the relationship between consciousness and intelligence. And it kind of made me think about intent. And it's funny, in a kind of day where most things are kind of getting away from us, and we're kind of starting to kind of like see a certain, I don't know, a morality or immorality. And by morality, I mean a sense of time. And what I mean by time is a sense of understanding circumstance. You establish a sense of morality within that which is important to understand survival in a particular age. And I think what happens is we've kind of lost that sense. And I remember kind of thinking to myself, hey, who talked about that? And I went back and I found, one of my most annotated, dog-eared, kind of like destroyed books. And I remember the last pages of The Revolt of the Masses. And, what happens is, Ortega does a great job at his analysis of what he calls the self-satisfied or the mass man, as opposed to the noble or the kind of like individual who kind of sees himself as understanding his destiny within the context of his circumstance. And, the self-satisfied man is the person who I kind of think has kind of come to rise. But in 1930, Ortega said something I'm about to read to you. But when I think about I used to have a colleague, we always used to joke that, we've gone from the revolt of the masses in Europe to what is now the reign of the masses. So I'll read this piece, which I think is very important. And Ortega talks about morality in that sense of what is that understanding, that constitution of a time. It is indifferent whether it disguises itself as reactionary or revolutionary, actively or passively. After one or two twists, its state of mind will consist decisively in ignoring all obligation and in feeling itself without the slightest notion why possessed of unlimited rights. Whatever be the substance which takes possession of such a soul, it will produce the same result and will change into a pretext for not conforming to any concrete purpose. If it appears as reactionary or anti liberal, it will be in order to affirm that the salvation of the state gives a right to level down all other standards and to manhandle one's neighbor, above all, if one's neighbor is an outstanding personality. But the same happens if it decides to act as revolutionary. The apparent enthusiasm for the manual worker, for the afflicted, and for social justice serves as a mask to facilitate the refusal of all obligations such as courtesy, truthfulness, and above all, respect or esteem for superior individuals and their work. I know of quite a few who have entered the ranks of some labor organization or other merely in order to win for themselves the right to despise intelligence and to avoid paying it any tribute. As regards other kinds of dictatorship, we have seen only too well how they flatter the masked man by trampling on everything that appears to be above the common level. I had forgotten this. This was written in 1930, and it could be written today. Because if there's anything I continue to return to in the onslaught of detritus and rabble, it has been the onslaught of resentment and envy of genius. And whatever one thinks about or talks about, one of the things that's always masked in the conversation, I'm up against the wall, is always masked is intent. And one of the ways it's done is by starting by talking either from piety or from virtue, which of course is absurd. But it gives rise to basically manhandle one's neighbor, especially if he's superior, and to attack genius in its legacy, in its presence, and its potential for the future. So that is one of the things we have to contend with. And in this piece that I had gotten from Mr. Spock, that idea of consciousness as opposed to intellect rises above the possibility of having introspection, self-reference, the ability to kind of look at and say, what is intent? And it makes me even feel vindicated more so in the pursuit of the work of the maestro Leonardo, that Whitehead, when he talks about the century of genius, refers to the intent of the naturalistic artist in the embodiment of Leonardo to understand. So in that case, he does identify intent. And the intent of Leonardo is something that I've always felt was simply to understand. So with that said, I believe as we move into this organic age, we do so because this kind of rabble that surrounds us is basically just an obstacle because we've been somewhat procrastinating in moving forward. Okay, that's my preamble. Now, what's new in Julie?
I will go get it. You can have some tea.
Tea's tea. What do we have here? Mint. Mint for the refreshing summer heat, which we're experiencing here in New York.
It's not at all a refreshing thing to experience the heat.
No. What's refreshing is having a chilled or a cool mint tea, Tea's tea, mint green tea by your side. And here's our backup.
Yes, well,
right?
That part truly
absolutely is. And it's had a nice slight chill to it. So I'm looking forward to that as we kind of venture forth.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you would be so kind.
I would be more than honored, my loved one.
Puddle. Appreciate it.
So
Okay.
And before we forget,
Yeah.
I'm Bruce. This is Julie. And that's our foreign correspondent, Penguin.
Hmm.
Was up for a Pulitzer Prize. Shortlisted right now.
It's good because there certainly aren't any journalists who should be up for it. Okay. I'd rather give it to a penguin.
It's tough Penguin.
She's
But,
one tough penguin.
She's one tough Penguin. So
Yes.
talk to us, Pete.
I think we might. Oh, yes. Zoom in. Yes. Okay. So,
Detail.
excellent. Thank you. This is my science drawing, my mycology drawing, which I was working on at the Met that I only started last week, with the title I have given it, Huckster Bouquet. Fusarium xyrophyllum mimics and hijacks a yellow-eyed grass. So what you are looking at are not flowers at all. They are pseudo flowers, and that is a scientific term. And a pseudo flower is another entity, another creature entirely that is in fact mimicking, taking the place of, as a doppelganger, or in this case is hijacking the flower's very existence. It is hijacking the yellow-eyed grass, which is native to Africa, FYI, its morphology. So this fungus mimics precisely the petals, the structure, the color, the pistils, and the stamens even. It's quite a brilliant masquerade. In addition, this fungus creates a chemical mimic for the scent of this particular flower, not a scent that smells kind of like all flowers or like most. It's the scent of this particular flower, and the chemistry is so on target, so precise, that in fact it fools, thank you, I think that's good, it fools the pollinators, not one but all of them. And it's very hard to fool. It fooled Bruce. Bruce is the apex pollinator of the yellow-eyed grass. I bet you all did not know Bruce is a pollinator.
Among others.
Among Bruce's many other talents, Bruce is a pollinator. Anyway, it fools.
Apex pollinator.
That's what I said. Yeah, apex pollinator. You're right up there. You are a ziggurat beetle, a ziggurat bee. So it fools the bees, the beetles, the butterflies, the ants, and the moths. And it's very hard to fool an insect. And this fungus, it creates ultraviolet light, which is an amazing feat, an incredible thing. Why the UV light? Because that's an incredibly sexy, powerful attractant to bees. And the bees will come, as the beetles do, as the butterflies do, in search of nectar from what they think, to all intents is the yellow-eyed grass, to not find any nectar, but in a brilliant twist, they don't have to. They're wandering around, they're walking all over it, they are flying, and the fungal spores of Fusarium cling to the legs and the bodies and the thoraxes and the wings of the pollinators, who fly off and crawl off and take it far and wide. And that's how the fungus reproduces. It is quite a... So what I have a funny and satirical take on the science here, where I have actually several inanimate human-crafted objects at the Met. One is a teapot. It's a British teapot with floral decorations and cabbage leaves swirling around this white hard porcelain teapot, which has placed itself upside down in an attempt to mimic what the fungus is doing perfectly in the teapot with its spout and its handle is extremely obvious. Next to the teapot over here is a Japanese incense burner that I've just sketched in quickly, but will be drawing in its complexity next Friday at the Met, which is attempting to mimic the scent of the flower. And of course, since it's an incense burner and is only able to burn that human-made scent, it's not going to smell anything like the yellow-eyed grass. Therein is the science humor in this piece.
Okay, good.
So, yes.
All right. So,
Okay.
let's that was brilliant. And I think one of the things that's interesting, Julie and I kind of talked about a process-related aspect of her work, which is the idea that in the nature of the pieces from which Julie finds the inspiration and finds the kind of curiosity or kind of opportunity for imagination, the generation of, say, a small kind of like script, narrative, libretto manifests itself as a kind of pendant piece to the drawing or the painting, so that the drawing or the painting becomes an illustration, though still independent, becomes an illustration of that particular narrative. Now, in doing so, that means a lot of the operational aspects that are very, very key become more of a component part of the actual piece. So, with that said,
great idea.
right,
yes.
What are some of these organic exemplars of individuation in this kind of interconnectedness as we moved into the possibility of this organic age?
Okay, well, here is something that actually touches and connects all of these things. It was a research article I just read in Science that was so astonishing in its scope and its implications. It is a neuroscience piece, and it is about spikes in the epileptic brain. And this is a jaw dropper. These are called interictal spikes. That's interictal. Now, this is a key word. I'm going to break down the prefix. Those are great. Do you want chopsticks so you don't get all chopped?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'll get chopsticks.
Okay. No, finish up.
Okay, so yeah, I know, like, the packaging isn't great. It makes it very hard to get. Anyway, what is incredibly important here are the root words, because it has everything to do with the function and the effect. So the prefix and the suffix. So interictal is the medical term which refers to the time period between epileptic seizures. Now, or say an attack, which is a seizure. What is fascinating, and the doctors and clinicians have known about this for decades, but thought that these interictal spikes were benign and were not problematic, which boggles the mind.
Unimportant.
Yeah, that they were very unimportant. They ignored them. Now, to give you a sense of how often these occur in the epileptic brain, try this out: 100 to thousands of times every day. Now, if you have something going on in a brain that's not functioning well and optimally, and it happens hundreds or thousands of times a day, you ignore it. I mean, it kind of boggles the mind. So ictal, ICTAL, is the actual time during which a seizure is occurring. Therefore, that is the base word here. Now, when you're adding a prefix, interictal is the baseline period occurring between the seizures. Now, post-ictal, and this is really key, is the recovery time or period which occurs immediately after a seizure. Now, the thing to understand here is all they've been able to find out is they can predict when one of these spikes happens a second before it happens, which doesn't help anybody. And there are no drugs for it. And in fact, the epileptic drugs for the seizures don't do anything for the spikes. Now, why? Now, what does this have to do? Everything has to do with things to come. Is these abnormal electrical bursts? They hijack three groups of neurons that are involved in speech, linguistics, word processing, and cognition. So when an interictal spike happens in 2023, a neuroscientist observed in not one of the subjects, every single person in the study had a black hole where that word would have been. They had a blank where that idea was. So anything that happened, anything that was said, a word, a phrase, an idea, a connection in the brain was gone, like it never existed, meaning that the present and the future, because you cannot have a cognitive future, you cannot have a linguistic polis or linguistic structure or linguistic maze if you don't even know that the base words or the building blocks even existed in the present. Meaning every time these spikes happen, these poor people are hurled back into the past again and again prior to the spike. But they don't even know what they haven't processed and haven't heard, because it's gone. It's literally called a blank.
Wow.
Which is mind-boggling.
Interesting.
And it is what I call, and this is a term I think you will find interesting, this is my term based on the research, is a perforated past. And a perforated past I define as a past that is being remade and reshaped against a person's will, that is full of gaps and holes and chasms that pop up that they have no control over.
I could call that my lot. It's interesting.
Yeah.
We'd spoken about a month or so ago. We talked about the idea of the present and then the future and the era. And I remember at 10 years old, in 1969, the future seemed very palpable. It was very present. And we're moving into what they called the space age. And the space age was, I guess, again, a result of the machine age and the modern age. But it was basically going to a new thing. And it was right there. At the World's Fair in 1964 in Flushing, we saw these things. We saw the spaceships. We saw the convenience. We saw the idea of making life for the average individual more convenient, more efficient, in order to allow him time to engage in his hobbies and in activities and in those things that fired his imagination. That mentality was a mentality that was still alive, that forged across the ideas of garage bands and kind of startups, which again was one of the things that never was a kind of government program, but basically was more kind of like an idiom of technology that basically allowed for such circumstances to take place. These are never going to be top-down things. It basically relies on the idea of a liberal mentality of unbridled freedom for genius. And as Ortega basically said, if there's one thing that both the reactionary and the revolutionary look for, it's to basically destroy that principle. As much of that has happened. So in terms of this idea of like a perforated past, I look at the fact that the space age that was taking place in the 1960s into the 1970s, and was something that I expected to be part of my growing up in America, never manifests itself. And what was substituted was never really clarified as to what it was indeed. So now when I think about the idea of kind of going back to the moon, with the Artemis project, or kind of like going to Mars and going beyond, I think to myself, that same past, right? Like, so not in 1969, that idea of a future, of a space age that I almost felt I could touch, that disappeared because of a lack of conviction, a lack of will of my government and other people, right? A cowardly kind of gutlessness had then manifests itself now with this idea of something maybe reemerging only out of, not of governments, but of the will of individuals. So I see now the possibility that that half a century ago, that future that I was about to touch may be returning, but it's actually further away.
Yes.
Which to me is a betrayal.
Oh yeah.
Right, of the conviction of government, of those people who are alleged to be leaders. So a lack of conviction, a lack of constitution, a lack of vision, a lack of courage. And that's where I think hopefully we as individuals can manifest something of consequence with an organic age, which is a truly new thing, which can be forged on things that are basically about the idea of the stability and the consequence of things that come into being, exist, and then pass on.
Beautifully said.
Thank you, Pete.
I do want to quote this neuroscientist, because what he said is shocking. So the 2023 team that found what these spikes actually do, it's okay, is Jonathan Kleen, Kleen, kind of an ironic name, as in all memories wiped clean, from UCSF, had reported, I quote, this is a quote, that people with temporal lobe epilepsy could not remember or repeat back even a single word spoken to them during a spike. They went blank. That was his word. Now, I am saying that because their brains cannot construct a future, much like the World's Fair, as things to come are ripped brutally away by a present and a recent past that are being systematically erased. And I bring to you the most dastardly and tantalizing part of all this. Guess what kind of sequence the spikes are cascading in? A choreographed sequence.
Oh my God.
Now that to me is the most earth-shattering. It's choreographed, and that is the appropriate word, like a ballet, like an opera, like it is choreographed. And my question is, what is choreographing it? When you have a choreographer, in this case, we have a phantom who is choreographing this. They don't know what forces, what systems in the body are choreographing this. And here is the final thing before we move on about these black holes. He actually used something called a neuropixel, which is fascinating and not what anyone thinks. It's a ribbon implant the width of a human hair that found these three groups of neurons being hijacked. No one even knew. And the spikes occur as much during sleep as wake.
Oh my God.
Meaning they are stealing away these people's dreams.
Jesus.
I mean, literally.
Christ.
So I will not be so glum about our next.
I was gonna make light of that, but there's I was gonna say something, but I'm not going to, because it would be cruel. That is one of the most horrifying things I think I've ever heard.
It is. Yes.
And tell a story about what happened tonight.
Oh, well,
I mean, are you up to it?
Yeah. Because I don't know.
This was something that was just absolutely gut-wrenching.
It really was. While I was drawing at the Met, I don't know her name, so I'm not giving away anybody's identity. She was a lovely young woman, very effervescent, really intelligent, a creative force, who was very interested in my.
Don't talk about her vocation, because
yes,
we're talking about it.
Yes, anyway, during our conversation, I was simply talking to her about this, our podcast on our YouTube channel. And I noticed that when she said something, a few seconds later, it was as if it had never been said. And I would say something, and it was like it never existed. And there seemed to be on her end no recollection. And I couldn't believe that I was witnessing. It turns out she is epileptic. And I was literally experiencing what it is like to converse with somebody afflicted with interictal spikes. And it throws you back into an earlier part, not just of the conversation, but before you ever started having the conversation, into her past as she talked about it. And I don't want to say any more because I don't want to give away her identity. But anyway, we have a lot to cover. So I don't. Oh, would you let me know?
Go ahead.
Okay. So, in a fascinating move, I believe one of the greatest harbingers of things to come was the invention and active tool use of the microscope. And this is a positive thing. By the artist and the scientists in active search of not just things to come, structures to come, processes to come, systems to come. And very few people have actually heard of him. So I would like to introduce you to the Snuffler. And this is the perfect juncture. A brilliant Dutch painter named Otto Marcius van Schryck. Not making up that name. There's exactly one painting of his on view at the Met in the Masters Galleries. He lived from either 1619, and these dates are really, really key, or 1620 to 1678. In addition to being a painter, at the same time, he amassed a huge cabinet of curiosities, which he collected by himself. He was, and I don't want to use the word amateur, but he was not paid, but he was an amateur entomologist, herpetologist, mycologist, plant scientist. He collected natural organic specimens from the forest floor. He scavenged, he adventured on the forest floor, and most of the topics of his paintings were the snakes and frogs and things growing in, on, and under the forest floor in strata upon strata, growing up from there. Why is this key? He was one of the first artists to use the microscope, which was brand new, to examine these. And this was, to put it in perspective, 200 years before Ernst Haeckel. 200 years.
Interesting.
Most people think, Ernst Haeckel did amazing work, but 200 years prior, so was Otto Marcius van Schryck. So Ernst Haeckel lived from 1834 to 1919. So his paintings about the scientific hidden, now revealed, things to come that were unimaginable, things to come that were inconceivable in a scientific future which had never been seen, which was now uncloaked, which most importantly was not only visualized but quantified. So he quantified a future. Yeah.
And in fact, you think about the
I'm really melty.
Sorry, Pink.
Oh, thanks. I'm gonna get a napkin.
You think about the microscope. I mean, this was like, think back to micrographia with Robert Hooke.
Here's a timeline of the microscope.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, Robert Hooke, 1665. Okay, cool. Anyway, I want to digress for a moment back to something that is like related to this, is the fact that, like, at any particular juncture, there are things that are principles of a new age, which will basically be carried over from a previous age as things basically kind of like may shuffle in and out. And it's not as if things start completely new. It's just that these things start from places where they might basically be readjusted. Now, again, what's interesting is we go back to the Age of Genius, where Whitehead is talking about the fact that at the same time, Bacon and Leonardo, one an artist, polymath, and the other one basically someone who starts out as a kind of like an advocate or a lawyer,
Yeah.
who start out in terms of these kind of things, giving this sense of kind of the idea that investigations from multidisciplines. Now, again, we kind of get to the point where we understand that this is an essential thing. Now, based on the idea of a process, certain things come to be and have a certain concrescence, and then basically are stable for a moment. And in the nature of that stability can be identified. But then, like anything else, understands the fact that it becomes something that basically kind of, will disappear. So these stabilities are transient. So in the fact that like this idea, which I think was one of the great inventions of Whitehead, was that in terms of metaphysics, where this kind of idea of Plato and Aristotle of kind of like these kind of like forever things, these eternal forms, was seen to be incredibly naive, as the fact that like we don't have in the nature of an ontological reality a being, but a becoming, an eternal kind of becoming, as a result of the fact that we now understand that organic process, which I think is probably just as we see other people who kind of were capable of kind of understanding the principles of the Age of Genius, of the Enlightenment, of the Renaissance, whatever, we will come to see, I think, Whitehead's plot process philosophy as the kind of underpinning of this organic age. Now, I mean, that's an ambitious thing for me to say that, but I think all these sense of things that we're moving towards, the sense of interconnectedness, symbiogenesis, and things like this, these all point towards these ideas of overcoming this kind of like anthropocentric hubris and isolation of us in regards to other organisms, which I think is still the vestige of a Christian, kind of a Judeo-Christian tradition, which served us very well, and still serves us in many regards. But I think in terms of the isolation, it manifests itself, I think, somewhat in regards to artificial and natural selection. And that has a premise in The Origin of Species, but I think it maybe gets misunderstood as it itself will kind of give rise to a kind of like more organic aspect of the differences between these two, rather than a kind of like, I wouldn't say a binary, but a kind of an opposition, because I do believe that they're actually kind of manifestations of the same thing. So with that said, we're seeing these kind of things and these appearances. And I think that as a result, we start to understand the fact that we will come to manifest these things within a kind of cultural circumstance. And, we're starting to see things as if things are kind of like verbs and not nouns. The New Age has been, like I said, at the same distance from me my whole life. But I think that's basically because that which is returning to a kind of somewhat of nostalgia is not really manifest of what in fact it really is. Hopefully it can be incorporated. But I think the incorporation is basically an ability to not really see fully how it's actually going to manifest. So in regards to that, what will be those other things that give rise to this identification? Now, we've talked about the fact that there's been a cultural revolution in Europe and in the United States, and that that culture war has been lost. And we see the fact that like we have very little of consequence to look at and to kind of be proud of, because I think what's happened is we've kind of lost the sense of what it was that that culture is actually out to manifest. So as a result, again, it goes back to this idea of the onslaught on genius, that attack on those things that are the legacy as well as the mentality. So it's genius is not just those things that have been left as kind of like reliquaries of great achievements in certain places. It's also that mentality that manifests itself in terms of the ability to kind of manifest the destiny in a circumstance and be able to kind of continue that, because no piece of consequence can be timeless. All things become relevant and valuable in terms of how it deals with a circumstance that's presented to it, which is why sometimes things, when you look back on them, they still have a consequence in the present, because that aspect is still valid and is still palpable. However, that doesn't mean that always that's going to be the case, and in fact, sometimes it simply is a recurrence. So, with that said, oh, thank you, P. What's this?
Cheese.
Oh, cheese for my so we got going to get the oxalate. Yeah,
you have to have it at the same time, so it's going to bud.
Yes, so
shall I continue?
Yes, my loved one.
Well, let's go to something a little bit lighter. Jacques Tati. Now, this is very key. So, anticipatory humor. So, things to come. I will be talking. Oh, can you open it? I will be talking about two of Jacques Tati's incredibly splendid and inspired films, comedic and satirical. And his particular graphic, it is really like watching a three-dimensional version of beautifully designed graphic poster. So Jacques Tati's. Oh, thanks. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Let's talk.
Oh, go.
We'll talk. Then I'll talk.
Go ahead. Me?
Yeah, cheese.
Oh, thank you, Pete.
Sure. So talk to them when I'm finished chewing.
Okay.
We're eating chocolate, so.
Yes, you are. And well.
Thanks.
So, what are some of the principles that we bring with us? I think one of the things that's been with us probably since the age of genius, as it were, was that idea of the kind of abstractness of rationality, which manifests itself in mathematics. I think that ability to understand the fact that you can map and understand circumstance and understand and divine certain laws, and by laws, those are the kind of like aspects of math that can be identifiable in order to kind of identify things within sensations and passions and other things. A good example is the fact that, we often get caught up in this idea that there are different realities and that there's different things that cannot be understood and not be appreciated. And I think what really is wrong with that thinking is the fact that in order to even make that statement, you have to understand that you're positing a contradiction that manifests itself as proving that the truth is something that's discernible. So the example being, in the individual who has a toothache, right? The dentist doesn't extract the toothache, he extracts the tooth. The tooth is the same tooth for the patient as it is for the dentist. So in that regard, to say as if there's a relativity or as there's my truth, no. There's simply the reality of that essence, which is basically shared, but is seen from different points of view. But the reality does not change. So anyway.
I've finished chewing. So Jacques Tati's 1967 Playtime, which was not understood even remotely in its day. It bankrupted him and his sister and his mother and everyone who invested in it. And Jacques Tati built what is now known as Tativille, which was literally a city with working traffic lights and roads and structures. And it was just incredible. It actually had infrastructure. It had plumbing and electricity, and it was quite a brilliant thing. I'm having mint Tease
Mhm.
Tea.
Yep.
Extremely.
Thank you, Tease Tea,
Thank
our
you,
great
Tease
sponsor.
Tea. So this was built to endure and to actually stand as a future, as things to come for film production in France. It was meant to be a studio and a home for inventive and creative minds in film for years, but was dismantled by provincial minds, humorless bureaucrats, and conventional movie makers and jittery quotidian backers. So Tati's very singular, thoroughly unique abstraction of humor, and I will use the term abstraction of humor, it was not obvious. Yes, there were certain things that were very, very physical, but they were very sophisticated. It was an intellectualized physicality.
Mm.
It was not, a Keystone Cops.
Mm.
It was absurd, but it was ironically and satirically absurd.
Deeply absurd.
It was deeply absurd in profound ways.
Mhm.
And this film was a futuristic and surreal shadow box of narrative clusters in a very unconventional storyline, and where I would say that our term anticipatory humor is this: the expectation of smooth, fast, quiet, efficient, and superior things that work in a seamless way, very, very efficient, advanced in their performance, which quickly yields and proves to be jarring in how they actually act, which is they malfunction. They're full of absurd kinks and weird sounds. They are cacophonous. They are bizarre. The design that looks like it's such a sleek thing fails and it breaks down, but it doesn't break down with a whimper, and it doesn't just kind of hop away. It collapses, it bangs, it explodes. It actually attacks the users, which is extremely different. It is outrageously glitchy. So it is a system that is anticipated to be a superior one, which turns about, which in turnabout is a haywire kind of a labyrinth that one cannot escape from it, and it is irritatingly poor in its performance. So, like, would you like to talk about the kitchen of the future scene in the Villa Arpels in Tati's Mon Oncle, one of my favorite films of all time from 1958?
Well, I mean,
Yes.
I'll talk about the
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah,
'Cause
sure.
I think what happens is we were talking before about the fact that at certain times we went from this kind of like, interesting unraveling of what was assumed or what was anticipated to the fact where we actually manifest that. And I think that the space age for me was a place where we saw the efficiency and opportunity for great achievements. I mean, notwithstanding the most important one, which was actually landing on the moon. But at the same time, in 1964 in the World's Fair, we saw all kinds of things, and everyone talked about the future because the future was basically next door. We had the car of the future, we had the toaster of the future, we had the something else of the future,
Yeah.
the watch of the future. Everything was about efficiency. Everything
Yeah.
was about maintaining the idea of having a vital, visceral infrastructure that created opportunity for the individual to manifest within his own imagination. And I think these cases, not answer your question, was where we actually saw that great opportunity. Technology now is about surveillance, about convenience, it's about all kinds of other things, but it's not about efficiency to free up individuals so they can have opportunity to engage their minds.
But that was the promise.
That was the promise, and for a long time that was actually the opportunity. I mean, when people kind of one of the things that happened around this time was cameras and clocks and watches. And I mean, the idea of being able to kind of like have the ability to kind of like generate kind of some kind of souvenir of a memory, so that we could manifest things quickly, and that we could basically kind of keep records of things. I mean, these were the kind of things that was basically kind of giving the opportunity for the person to be able to manifest their own identity and their own imagination. But this basically quickly got out of control. And now what we see is there's a difference between efficiency and comfort and convenience. You know, efficiency and creating opportunity has gone, and what we've done now is created convenience and, you know, comfort, and that is a completely different thing. The person who was going to build his model trains in his basement, or going to do his you know, his kind of plastic models and his of cars and trains and trucks, and collecting stamps and collecting coins and all these kind of other things, making your imaginary worlds. This was to give you that place where you had that same manifest destiny that would become that American spirit. The American spirit was very much alive at this time in terms of the idea of the individual having the idea of seeing himself within the hobby mentality to be anyone he thought he could be. And that was the great thing about America, was the incredibly brazen idea that one could be any historical figure if one put their mind to it. This was an idea that was so amazing that any individual, right? Now, again, there were certain people who were racially and sexually excluded from these things, which also was something that gave rise to a kind of like social revolution in the 60s, was because I think we realized, like, hey, this identity, this potential is something that really needs to be shared. So I think we started to identify, hey, you know what? This isn't shared by everyone. It's not offered to anyone and everyone, and it needs to be. And I think that that's when we started to see the fact that there were certain things that needed to be corrected. And I think the fact is, when we look at these things, we have to be honest, is that those people who are alleged to have been of privilege were in fact the people who brought these things into happening, because the people who were the minorities who were downtrodden did not have the ability to do this by themselves, given the system that was manifest. So what happens is, people who saw an opportunity where they could have basically said, oh, well, it's to my advantage for these people to be not in competition with me, said to themselves, no, this is wrong. So I think one of the things that has to be given more credit than it ever is the fact that the social revolutions of the 60s and the 70s were not created to stop certain people from having certain privileges. It was that those people were willing to be compassionate enough to basically extend those privileges, because they understood the fact that it was necessary and it was civil. Okay, so we're running out of time. I know. This went so fast. It's so sad. I'd like to
get to this fast.
Say.
Yes. So I'd like to talk about a particular imposed history which erodes a compromised future, specifically things to come for the 1713 Gibson Stradivarius. So the violin, this is when the very life of a musical instrument and its future is commandeered in waves by the human impact. So there was a very notorious 1936 heist of virtuoso Bronislaw Huberman's beautiful and magical 1713 Gibson Stradivarius, which was unbelievably stolen from his dressing room in Carnegie Hall. So, but wait till you hear who it was stolen by. It was stolen by a despicable and devious street player, a cafe violinist who played in bars and on the street, named Julian Altman. And that's the only time I will say his name, because he does not deserve to be recalled or named or remembered. Sorry, after I finish.
Okay. I'll
Can
take that.
you save it for me? Yeah.
Okay.
Because
I'll
I
leave
won't
it
be
for you.
able to cover the Stradivarius if I'm
Say.
doing. So this nefarious thief, which is what I will call
What a
him
scumbag.
now, kept this stolen Stradivarius hidden, but wait, in plain sight, covering it with layers upon layers of black shoe polish, playing it in bar gigs for 50 years. That's not 15, that's 50. So imagine when you are altering and destroying and sullying. I mean, it ruined the sound of the Stradivarius. He was covering the wood and the pores, altering with layer upon layer of shoe polish, just from his ego and his hubris and his greed. And yes, I've got a Stradivarius, but it didn't make him famous. It didn't give him a career because he didn't deserve one. So they only found it because on his deathbed, he confessed to his wife in 1985 that he'd stolen a Stradivarius and had hidden it and played it for 50 years. And his widow, who obviously was horrified, handed it over to Lloyd's of London, where it underwent a massive restoration because he had ruined this beautiful, one-of-a-kind instrument. Every Stradivarius is an individual, is an entity, is a living thing. In future, guess who owns it now? Joshua Bell.
Oh, I love Joshua Bell. Oh, that's fantastic.
So, unbelievably, though, wait, there is a preamble. Unbelievably, before this infamous 1936 incident, this Huberman Stradivarius was first stolen in 1919 from a hotel room in Vienna. And fortunately, it was stolen by a thief who was so inept that when he tried to sell it, the police got him and arrested him. So there's actually a long and storied history of the Stradivarius. This I will save, this tantalizing bit, for next week, are the 3 paths of things to come for 3 different Stradivarius violins, all of which were tainted by Napoleon. And I will save that because that is more in depth. Okay.
And as we know, if it isn't already clear, that group of people that is most beleaguered, most under siege, most basically attacked, are the individuals of genius.
Oh, yeah.
The rabble resents and envies the genius because the genius reminds them of their inconsequence. So the idea is always destroy it because maybe possibly we can make it so it doesn't exist. There will always be genius, my friends. There will always be freedom, my friends, because people will fight for it. So anyway.
Well, next week, certainly have to.
Yeah, absolutely. So next week, we're talking about the consequence of value. What is value? Where does it come from? What does it do?
That's perfect.
Right.
For this.
Exactly.
Yes,
exactly. Because I mean,
this.
What happens is there's more kind of recurring themes and the things coming of the age and principles and things like this. One of the things that I've added, and I think we're so far ahead now, it's actually up until December, almost Christmas, which is intent based on the video that we watched today. So the organic age is upon us, and it's up to us to understand how to get there. So the realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to the benefit of us all because it's real. And keep it that way.
Yes, and it's played on a Stradivarius.
Absolutely, because there'll always be someone who can play the Stradivarius.
Yes, precisely.
Stay free.